You're sitting at a red light, foot on the brake, and your tachometer starts dancing on its own. It climbs to 1,200 revolutions per minute, drops to 500, almost stalls, then surges back up like the car has a mind of its own. Every time it happens, you're one bad hunt away from a stall in traffic, and the shop you called quoted you $600 to run a diagnostic. Today we cut through it. By the end of this video, you'll know the 7 real causes ranked from the cheapest fix to the most expensive. You'll know exactly which onboard diagnostics Generation 2 or OBD2 codes to look for, and you'll know the 60-second test you can run in your own driveway before you hand anybody a dime. This is the stuff the parts counter guy wishes he could tell you, minus the upsell. Let's get into how your idle works, because once you understand that, all 7 causes click into place. How idle actually works. Your engine has a target idle. The engine control module, or ECM, wants to hold your revolutions per minute, or RPM, at a set number when your foot is off the gas. On most warmed up gasoline engines, that target sits between 600 and 1,000 revolutions per minute, and a lot of them settle around 700 to 800. Diesels idle a touch lower, roughly 600 to 750. On a cold start, you'll see 1,000 to 1,500 for the first minute or two while the engine warms the catalytic converter, and that's normal. Here's the loop. Air comes in through the throttle body, or on older cars, through an idle air control, or IAC, bypasses around the closed throttle plate. Fuel sprays in through the injectors. Spark fires the plugs. Then a whole team of sensors reports back to the ECM. The mass airflow sensor, or MAF, measures incoming air. The manifold absolute pressure sensor, or MAP, reads engine load. The oxygen, or O2, sensors read the exhaust. The throttle position sensor, or TPS, reports the throttle angle. The coolant temp sensor tells the computer how warm the engine is. The ECM reads all of that many times a second and trims fuel and airflow to hold the target. When one signal is wrong, or when unmetered air sneaks in, the ECM overcorrects. It adds fuel, pulls it back, opens the throttle, closes it, and chases a target it can't hit. That chase is what you feel as hunting. A small fluctuation of 50 to 100 revolutions per minute is normal. A visible climb and drop is not. Every cause on this list breaks that loop somewhere. Cause 1. Vacuum leaks. The most common by a wide margin is a vacuum leak. Rick Muscaplat, a former ASE certified master auto technician who spent 13 years as automotive editor at the Family Handyman, says it flat out on his site. This is exactly why vacuum leaks are the #1 cause of a rough idle. Any air that gets into the engine after the MAF goes uncounted. The ECM doesn't add fuel for it. The mixture goes lean, and idle is where it hurts most because the engine is only sipping air to begin with. A tiny leak is a big percentage of small airflow. The usual suspects are cracked or brittle vacuum hoses, a torn intake boot between the MAF and the throttle body, a leaking intake manifold gasket, a bad brake booster hose, and a failed positive crankcase ventilation line. On many engines, those rubber and plastic parts get hard and split with heat cycling. The codes to look for are P0171 and P0174. Per the Society of Automotive Engineers, or SAE J2012 standard that defines generic OBD2 codes, P0171 means System 2 Lean Bank 1, and P0174 means System 2 Lean Bank 2. Here's the pro trick: watch your fuel trims on a scan tool. High positive fuel trim at idle that drops back towards 0 at 2,500 RPM points straight at a vacuum leak. To find it, listen for a hiss. Then do a smoke test where a machine pushes smoke into the intake and you watch where it escapes. If you don't have a smoke machine, a shop does, and it's the fastest method. Cost to fix runs cheap. A cracked hose or PCV line can be under $50 in parts, while an intake manifold gasket job climbs higher because of labor. Repair Pal pegs. A typical intake manifold gasket replacement at a national average of roughly $560 to $810 depending on the vehicle. Cause 2. Dirty throttle body or an idle air control motor. A dirty throttle body or a sticking idle air control motor. Over time, oil vapor from the PCV system bakes onto the throttle plate and the bore. That carbon changes how much air sneaks past at idle, so the ECM can't hold a steady number, and the idle hunts between roughly 500 and 1,500 RPM, often worse after warm-up. On cars built before the mid-2000s, a separate IAC valve does this job, and those gum up or stick with carbon. The code here is P0505, which SAE J2012 defines as idle air control system malfunction, along with P0506 for idle lower than expected and P0507 for idle higher than expected. GoPart's P0505 guide tells techs to clean the throttle body and IAC before buying parts, as carbon buildup causes over 45% of idle issues. The fix on most cars is a throttle body cleaning. 2 warnings. First, on a drive-by-wire electronic throttle body, do not force the plate open or blast harsh solvent onto the motor and gears. Use throttle body cleaner and a soft cloth. Second, and this is the step everyone skips, most cars need an idle relearn afterward. Disconnect the battery or clean the throttle body and the ECM loses its learned idle position and it hunts until it relearns. Here's the part that trips people up. Relearn procedures are not universal. Toyota often uses a battery disconnect method or a warm idle and drive method. GM frequently wants a set of timed idle periods in park. Key off between them. Ford and many GM models finish the relearn through a normal drive cycle, while Nissan uses a specific idle air volume learn sequence. Honda's electronic throttle bodies frequently need the idle relearned after any battery disconnect. Check the procedure for your exact year, make, and model. DIY parts cost is basically the price of a can of cleaner. A shop visit runs more once you add labor and the relearn. Cause 3, MAF sensor. Number 3 is a dirty or failing MAF sensor. That little sensing wire measures your incoming air. Coat it with oil or dust and it's underreports airflow, so the ECM adds the wrong amount of fuel and the idle wanders. The classic culprit is an over-oiled aftermarket air filter that sends oil mist straight onto the MAF wire. The codes are P0100 through P0104, with P0101 MAF range/performance, the one you'll see most. Symptoms include hunting, rough idle, poor fuel economy, and sometimes stalling. On a scan tool, a healthy MAF at warm idle reads roughly the engine's displacement in liters, so a 2.5 liter 4 reads around 2 to 5 grams per second, OBD guides. The fix is often just cleaning. Use dedicated MAF cleaner, the kind sold as MAF safe and never break cleaner or carb cleaner, which leave residue or wreck the delicate wire. Spray it, let it dry, reinstall. If cleaning doesn't hold, replace it. But here's the real-world warning every good mechanic gives: buy original equipment manufacturer, or OEM. Aftermarket MAF sensors are one of the highest return rate parts in the whole industry. Nissan Altimas are the poster child here. Owners across the Nissan forums report a P0101 that keeps coming back. And Nissan Technical Service Bulletin NTB16-030A, covering 2013 to 2016 Altimas with the QR25DE engine, actually tells techs to inspect the PCV valve, replace it if it's discolored, reprogram the ECM if needed, and do not replace the mass airflow sensor. On those cars, a generic MAF often fails within days. Cause 4, failing O2 sensor. A failing oxygen sensor. Your upstream O2 sensor, the one before the catalytic converter, reports whether the exhaust is running rich or lean, and the ECM uses it to trim fuel constantly. When that sensor gets old and slow to respond, the fueling starts swinging, and you feel it as hunting plus lousy mileage. The codes live in the P0130 through P0155 range for the upstream sensors. Walker Products, a sensor manufacturer, gives the interval straight. Heated O2 sensors, the 3 and 4 wire type on modern cars, should be replaced every 60,000 to 100,000 miles, while older unheated 1 and 2 wire sensors go every 30,000 to 50,000 miles. They don't always fail outright, they just get lazy. One caution: don't throw an O2 sensor at a lean code first. A P0171 with a bad O2 sensor is far less common than a P0171 from a vacuum leak, so confirm the sensor with live data before you buy one. Cost to replace runs modest to moderate depending on the car and how buried the sensor is. CarMD's data has historically put a faulty O2 sensor fix at under $200 in parts, though a shop job with labor runs higher. Cause 5, EGR valve. the exhaust gas recirculation, or EGR valve. Its job is to route a little exhaust back into the intake to lower combustion temperatures. When carbon builds up and the valve sticks open at idle, raw exhaust leaks into the intake constantly, disrupts the mixture, and you get a rough hunting idle, sometimes with a faint rotten egg smell. Per SAE J2012, P0401 is EGR flow insufficient, meaning the valve is clogged or stuck closed, and P0402 is EGR flow excessive, the classic stuck open condition. The related P0403 through P0409 codes point to the electrical and sensor side. The good news is you can often clean it. Pull the valve, soak and scrub the carbon off the pintle, and seat. Reinstall. That can be a sub $50 fix, while a full replacement typically runs from $150 to $600. Do not use brake cleaner on a valve with a diaphragm or electronics inside because it destroys them. Use an EGR safe solvent. One warning from the forums: on some engines, like older Toyotas, the real culprit is a vacuum switching valve or clogged passages behind the valve, so cleaning the valve alone lets the code come right back. Cause 6. PCV valve. The $10 fix everybody forgets, the PCV valves. Positive crankcase ventilation routes blow by gases out of the crankcase and back into the intake through a one-way valve. When that valve sticks open, it becomes an uncontrolled vacuum leak feeding unmetered air straight into the intake. The result is hunting, a lean condition, and often extra oil consumption. The tell is a lean code, usually P0171, sometimes P0300 for misfires, and a whistling or hissing sound at idle that fades above 1,500 revolutions per minute. Try pulling the oil filler cap with the engine running. If you feel strong suction or the idle changes, suspect the PCV system. This one bites GM Ecotec owners hard. On engines like the 1.4-liter turbo in the Chevy Cruze and Sonic, the PCV diaphragm is built into the valve cover, and when it tears, it creates a big vacuum leak. GM's own special coverage, Bulletin N2022-99080 for 2011 to 2014, Cruze in 2012 to 2014 Sonic, and N192206210 for the 2015 to 2016 cars, states that a cracked diaphragm means the engine may run rough, especially during idle, with a fuel trim lean code P0171, and GM extended coverage on that camshaft cover to 10 years or 120,000 miles because it was so widespread. The valve itself is $10 to $40. Labor is modest unless it's integrated into the cover. Which of these have you dealt with before? Comment on the make and model and how much it actually cost you at the shop. I read these, and they help other people in the same boat. Cause 7. Fuel system problems. It lands last because it's usually the priciest and less common than everything above. 4 things live here: weak or dirty fuel injectors, especially on gasoline direct injection or GDI engines, a failing fuel pump that can't hold pressure at idle, a clogged fuel filter on cars that still have a serviceable one, and a bad fuel pressure regulator. When fuel delivery is inconsistent, the engine hunts between just enough fuel and not enough. The codes are P0300 through P0308 for misfires and P0087 for fuel rail pressure too low. GDI engines are especially prone here because the fuel never washes the back of the intake valves the way port injection does, so carbon builds on the valves and the injectors run at extreme pressure. Here's the diagnostic split every tech uses. Compare fuel trims at idle to trims under load. Lean at idle only points to a vacuum leak or carbon. Lean everywhere points to fuel delivery. Then test fuel pressure. A port injection system usually wants somewhere around 40 to 60 pounds per square inch, or PSI, while a GDI low pressure side runs roughly 50 to 85 PSI, and the high pressure rail climbs into the hundreds or thousands of PSI. If actual rail pressure can't reach commanded pressure under load, the high pressure pump is the suspect. Costs run from a filter on the low end to a high pressure pump or a full injector set on the high end. Be careful, GDI systems hold dangerous pressure, so this is where a lot of people hand it to a shop. A few more that belong in the conversation. conversation. Failing ignition coils or worn spark plugs can cause a partial misfire that feels like a rhythmic surge at idle, and worn plugs and coils are the most common cause of a P0300 misfire. Fix the misfire before chasing anything else, because a lean condition will just foul new parts. A bad TPS can feed the ECM the wrong throttle angle and cause hunting or hesitation, often with a P0122 or P0123. Worn engine mounts don't cause hunting, but they make the shaking way worse, because a rough idle that used to be a small vibration now rocks the whole cabin. They amplify the symptoms, they don't create them. A weak battery or failing alternator can drop voltage under electrical load, and the ECM may struggle to hold a steady idle, especially with the headlights, defroster, and blower all running. Watch for a P0562 low voltage code, and an automatic transmission loads the engine the moment you shift into drive at a stop. Idle sags a little when you drop into gear, which is normal, but a weak idle control strategy turns that little sag into a stall. Here's the order that saves you money. First, scan for codes with a $30 OBD2 tool. Let the codes point you at a system instead of guessing. Second, do a visual. Check every vacuum hose, the intake boot right after the MAF, and the PCV line for cracks or loose clamps. Third, listen at idle. A hiss or whistle screams vacuum leak. Fourth, clean the cheap stuff first, the throttle body and the MAF, and do the idle relearn for your specific vehicle afterward. Fifth, if codes persist, test the O2 sensor, the EGR valve, and the PCV valve with live data before buying parts. Sixth and last, run a fuel pressure test, because fuel work is the most expensive and you want to rule out everything cheaper first. 9 times out of 10, the fix lives in the first 3 steps. Which one did I miss, or which one has been driving you nuts? Tell me in the comments. If this saved you a $600 diagnostic bill, subscribe. See you in the next one.